Dusum Sanjay Tam Jechino Rikan Chukor Jansu Chada Grishin Savelama Shabdur Jima Mepala Gusum Raptu Gubegone Chaksal Shin Chapsun Yivarji Dakshin Sanjay Tam Jeji Jumin Chingro Jinji Latuso Daktan Sanjay Tam Jeji Latuso Jor Jinji Latuso Cholanda Jor Jinji Latuso Lantrupaso Jinji Latuso Chubaya Shisu Chor Jinji Latuso Daktan Sanjay Tam Jeji Jumin Chingro Jinji Latuso Namaria Laiki Dandara Jinki Rumdata Mi Kinandan Drua Kanji Jagi Jisambaratam Jiki Dagi Chetendo Seden Chichi Chandra Vazirji Dagratimu Nanta Rapsani Kadan Tenchu Shungru Tokbai Lodru Papa Namwa Jedu So Shanse Taur Dabam Shanse Jivardhanayam Gombo Jamyam Chinichi Topa Mepa Tong Varshu Kangi Namur Chini. Thank you, Swamiji, for the introduction and making it through those names. The people were as big as the names, actually, all of those people. So I'm only back for a day now here, but I already feel very peaceful. Peaceful like coming back to some place with family where you can just relax and talk very naturally and earnestly, comfortably. So that's a good feeling from which to share. There's an old instruction in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that comes almost from the time when the teachings came from India to Tibet. In fact, the person who said this, he was called by the Sanskrit title Mahapandita, great master, great scholar, Rongzong Chichizampo, Rongzong Mahapandita. He said the Dharma is what is true and what is helpful. And it is true because it is helpful, and it is helpful because it is true. So if you look at it that way, all we are here to do is learn the truth, reflect upon the truth, contemplate, integrate, and then meditate, which means bring it into our personal experience, so it's not just an idea, but it's how we actually live and how we actually see things. But to say that it's beneficial or good or helpful is not necessarily to say that it's easy or comfortable. So when we were talking at lunch today, one of the topics that came up was death and dying, which has been very real for many of us recently. And it's one of the most primary foundational teachings of Dharma to look at death, to reflect upon death, to understand what it is and what it means for our lives and how it launches us onto a spiritual path, how it keeps us close to that path, how it speeds us along that path, and how it brings us to realization. Death is a great teacher. So my recent experience in this regard was about a month ago when I was invited to teach at a center in Wales, a retreat hermitage. Very beautiful place. And the person who invited me was an English lady, older than me, been practicing, studying longer than I have. But she thought I could be helpful to her community, so I went to Wales. And just when I got off the plane in Manchester and she arrived to receive me, we got in the car, and there was a phone call that one of their senior community members at just that moment, moments before, had passed away. And what should they do? So there was a lot of discussion. They live in a very rural area There's not many options. But after some discussion, what happened was this. We arrived after driving for 2 hours through very remote parts of Wales. We arrived at the Hermitage. Right behind us was a little kind of ambulance vehicle, and out came the stretcher with the body on it, just like with a little cloth over it, just on like a pallet, like a stretcher. Not dressed up, not prepared, nothing. It was still, as they were carrying it out, it was still like wobbling a little bit, And they set it down on a stone wall in front of this beautiful reliquary stupa that had been built and consecrated there. And I did some special prayers that we have in our tradition and some practices that are called transference of consciousness, poa, where through the power of lineage and blessing and the power of truth, the power of concentration, power of good intention, what we call bodhicitta, you kind of amplify the power of the deceased person's consciousness to head off in the right direction at the time of death. A short explanation. So we did that, and we carried the body around the stupa 3 times and did many aspiration prayers for successful rebirth and transition and so on. And the family was very happy. They actually thought it was very auspicious that the person happened to die just when I arrived and we could do these special practices. So that was good enough, and then a week later it was time for me to leave, and this lama, the lady who had invited me, she had an ex-husband even much older than herself, who was an even older student of Tibetan Buddhism who lived in Oxford. And he'd been calling all week, and finally he decided, even though his eyesight was poor and his health was poor, he wanted to drive 3 hours from Oxford to the airport in Manchester just to have a half-hour conversation with me before I left, because he didn't have many opportunities to talk to other practitioners, and he had some questions. I won't say at the end of his life, but I will say at the later stages of his life. So we had a nice conversation about death, among other things. And then just when I got to the security to say goodbye, he got a phone call. One of his senior students had just passed away. Could I do the same prayers for that person? I said, okay, I'll go to the lounge and I'll do some prayers in a quiet place in the airport. I said, but by the way, you should be glad you're getting rid of me, or else you'll have no community members left. Like that. So this is what's happening all around us. And similarly, there was a Swami who passed here recently. Many of you know, some of you may not know, the circumstances of that and the efforts that were made to guide and support and ease his transition. So the instruction I want to offer tonight puts this reality of death in a good context, in a proper context. And this is a basic outline of what we call the 6 bardos, or the 6 transitional states. And this is also a very old set of instructions, more than 1,000 years old in this format, older than that in origin. In Tibetan, we have this word bardo, and bar means in between, and do means a pair of things. So it means an interval or a gap. And the basic idea is that we are always in between. We are always on the way, we are always in a gap, in an open space that cannot be pinned down, that is never fixed in place or time. We are always in transition. And there are very distinct transitions, and these cycle, they move in a cycle, in a pattern. We transition from one to the next stage of transition. When we talk about living beings in the Tibetan language, we use terms first like semchen, which means one who has a mind. A being is one who has a mind, that means has the capacity to know and experience. But just as commonly to describe living beings, we use the word droa, which means transitory beings or transient beings. You know, like transient hotel? You're not there to stay for long, but you make the best of the situation. You know, hope they clean the sheets or whatever, transient. So we are transient beings. We're always in transition from here to there. The state in which we find ourselves now, in which everything seems to kind of stay in place more and last a little bit more, it appears to, where it seems like there's a lot of time, even a lot of like wasted or boring time. This bardo, or this state, is called the Chenechi bardo, or the transitional period from the moment of birth for as long as it lasts. That's literally what it means. As long as you're there, you're in that bardo. The bardo of this life is also commonly called. In the bardo of this life, we are easily fooled into feeling that things are permanent in a way that they're not permanent, into seeing things through our senses and in our minds, seeing them as real and solid in a way that they're not real and solid, and thinking of things as true and reliable in a way that they're not true and reliable. By things I mean appearances and concepts. That's the condition of this bardo in its confused state. When we are kind of adrift in this transitional state of this life, just fascinated by the experiences that are right in front of us, by our thoughts, by sensations, by emotions, by the rest of the aggregates of our being, then we don't think very much about death, and we don't want to think very much about death. It seems either unimportant, far away, or to be avoided at all costs. Yeah? So, I mentioned at lunch, one of my teachers, Choki Nyima Rinpoche, likes to say that there are two kinds of people. I say there are two kinds of people. Those who say there are two kinds of people and those who don't say there are two kinds of people. But he says there are two kinds of people. Those who don't want to hear about death, they don't want to think about death, they don't want to know about death, and we call these worldly people. People who are just trying to make do in the world, to extract what they can from their life experience. And then there's what we call Dharma people, spiritual people, you could say yogis. And these are people who, although it might be frightening or confusing or challenging, know that there's something very, very important to look at in connection with death, the reality of death. And looking at that can inform and transform the way that we live. Can add tremendous value and quality and preciousness to life, to take an honest and therefore helpful look at the reality of death. Two kinds of people. So we are in this bardo right now. And this is the reality not just of death, but of momentariness, of impermanence. That the next moment is never guaranteed. What shape it will take, what will manifest in that moment, how we will respond to it, or whether it's going to happen at all. The great Saint Milarepa said, the most amazing thing is that when we go to sleep at night, we actually wake up the next morning. It's like a miracle. And the great Saint Longchenpa said, we actually don't know what's coming first, our next breath or the next life. There's absolutely no guarantee. The next breath or the next life. It's a toss-up, actually. And no matter what we do and what we try and how we try to secure ourselves, we can only maybe adjust the odds in our favor slightly, but no more. So the bardo of this life is one where before we can ever quite figure out and pin down this moment, we're already gone into the next one. We're just flowing along, one appearance after another, right? One moment after another. Even one moment cannot be found. If you analyze it logically or you look at it deeply in your experience in meditation, there's a sense of presence, but there's never the power to isolate a true individual moment of experience or time. Impossible. It's a construct of our mind also. So we are always on the way in transition, never quite being anything, never quite settling down anywhere. Our life is this flow, it's this process, it's this unfolding of experience. This is the truth. Within this flow, within this unfolding of the uncertain bardo of this life, there are two other bardos that we can experience. One of them we definitely experience, and this is the bardo or the interval of dreaming. What's different about that, and the reason it's not just the same as life experience or waking experience, is that while it seems to us in dream that at times that we are occupying an ordinary physical body the way we conceive of it when we are awake, we are not. It's more clearly just a changeable mental construct, or we can say a body that is produced from thought, from prana, from energy, and nothing more. It's even more clearly insubstantial, intangible than this apparent physical body. And the way we experience things in dreams is even more uncertain, tenuous, changeable, unreliable, typically, than in waking life. There's a volatility to it that makes it qualitatively different from waking experience. So this is a different kind of consciousness, you could say, or a different type of experience, a different way of moving from one moment to the next. In dream state, time more easily expands and contracts than it does in waking life, in our subjective experience, though that can happen when we're awake also, as we know, like when we're waiting in line for something. So that's the second bardo of the bardos of this life, the bardo of dream. Then the third bardo is very important for us, and this is called the dhyana, the samten bardo, the bardo of meditative stability. Because when you draw the mind into a state of stillness and clarity and undivided attention, and all of the gross energy of the body-mind complex kind of settles down or integrates, then again you have a qualitatively very different kind of experience. You're not bound by time, by sensory input, by concepts, sensations in the same way you are either in the waking state or in the dream state. There's a different kind of timeless quality to remaining in equipoise, in non-thought, in samadhi or dhyana, in meditation. That also happens in this life. So those are the three bardos of this life, and we cycle through them repeatedly, especially the first two. And then come the critical remaining three bardos, which are the bardos of death and after death. So it's like half-half, right? The first is called Chike Bardo, or the bardo of the process of dying. There is a very well-developed science through observation, external observation, internal observation, subtle observation, scriptural authority, reasoning, and so on. There's a very subtle science of exactly what unfolds and transpires when being begins to lose connection with the phenomena and experience of this life. What happens to the body, what happens to the elements that compose the body, what happens to the energy system, what happens to the breath, what happens to the thought processes, what happens to different samskaras or mental formations, what happens to consciousness itself as its connection to the gross metabolism of this life begins to weaken. This is very exhaustively studied and taught. There is a moment at which, on both gross and subtle levels, the connection with this life ends. It's not just necessarily when the breath stops, it's not just necessarily when the pulse stops, it's not necessarily when brain activity stops. It's even more subtle than that. This is called the bardo of dharmata, or the bardo of reality. Interesting name. The meaning is that when everything that can happen in our minds, in our experience, about which we can become confused, is gone, and there's absolutely nothing left with which our consciousness can identify as being me or mine or about me, because all of that stuff has dissolved back into its basic nature. When absolutely nothing is left, only one thing is left, and that is the truth of who you really are. That's why it's called the bardo of reality. Dharmata. Dharmata is chunyi, means the way things are, or the actual nature of things, the actual nature of phenomena, of dharmas. So let me rewind a second, because I see you're so fascinated by this. I want to give you more. I'm so alert and happy to be hearing about dying before you have to wake up at 4 o'clock and do more pranayama. The reason it's helpful to hear these kinds of teachings, to learn about them, to understand them, is because there are practices you can apply based on this knowledge that give you the potential to accomplish liberation and realization in each one of these bardos. That's the point. Not just to scare you or depress you like you're stuck on this wheel and it just keeps going around and around, but rather that if you understand and can observe within your own experience the process of dying unfolding, because you've been working on it while you are alive and becoming very familiar and very confident and very stable, then you can free yourself very easily as it's happening for real at the end of your life. And the proof is that countless yogins and yoginis have done just this. This is why yoga or dharma is not just a philosophy, and it's not even a prescription for how to have a happier, more blissful or conscious life. It is actually a science of liberation. We train not only to be free of our disturbances and confusion, our tensions and stresses in this life, but to be perfectly prepared and poised to become completely free and liberated at the time of death as well. This is ultimately, or finally, the reason why anyone practices yoga. Maybe no one has told you this before, but it's probably good to know because it's true, and vice versa. It's not to say that you get there all at once, but the more you study, the more you train, the more you practice, the more you become interested in this and in investigating and practicing and mastering this. Not only can you master the process of dying itself and liberate your consciousness at that stage or in that bardo, but especially in the bardo of dharmata, or the bardo of reality, when the dissolution process of gross elements, subtle energies, and so on is complete, at that point, with no more obstacles in your way, if you have trained in this life to recognize that state, to recognize the natural state of your own being, of your own mind, free of any confusion, free of any delusion, then in that very moment you will be enlightened at the time of death. Nothing is in your way. And it's called the union of the mother and child luminosities. You are the child who's been practicing to recognize that luminosity your whole life. The mother luminosity is the natural state waiting for you to jump back into its lap at the time of death. Like a child joyfully being reunited with its mother. So it's quite joyful, an image, right? It's not depressing at all. It's quite nice. So that's the fifth bardo, the bardo of reality. And the sixth one, the final one, is called Sippe bardo, or the bardo of existential possibilities if you fail to attain enlightenment in that moment. And what this bardo is about is the fact that the potential for experience, for awareness, for you could say energetic manifestation is also part of your mind nature. So it's not just that when you strip all experience away, there's something fundamental there that has no features, no qualities, no dimensions, it's just like a point of reality and that's you. No. From that point, again, because it's kind of built into the nature, experience arises. It's the reverse of what happened when you were dying. You went from very gross down to very subtle, down to nothing manifest at all, just the basic state. And then from that, again, subtle appearances arise, which are the display of the 5 elements and so on. Different colors, different lights, different sounds. Even before you identify with or associate with any kind of physical being or physical body, your mind has that nature already to know, to experience, and to manifest. This is you. So different kinds of things can happen, and any kind of thing can happen. You kind of wake up, but you're not in a body. You might think you are again, like in the dream state, then you might realize again that you're not. And wherever you think you are, there you are. So it's very, very volatile, extremely volatile and extremely powerful. You can go anywhere. Your emotions are powerful. Your regrets for this life are powerful. Your hopes to escape from that state are powerful. Again, if you have trained in your life, if you remember the teachings of yoga or dharma, if you know how to calm yourself down and focus and center, if you know how to remember your guru, how to remember the divine nature, how to seek that out, again, there's a pathway to liberation even from that state. And there are volumes and volumes of teachings and guidance manuals on how to do this in our tradition. So there are many, many places you can go from there, but obviously one of them is back into this kind of experience, back into a bardo of this life, which is the bardo of the next life already. Because the nature of a stream is to keep flowing, and the nature of a stream is to keep flowing where the channel has already been cut, or where gravity takes it. Karma and habitual tendencies, and the channel again is our habits and our ingrained wishes and emotions and attachments. So the degree to which we can free ourselves of these kinds of tendencies and sources of confusion and suffering in this life is the degree to which we will be able to do likewise if and when we find ourselves in this after-death state, called the bardo of existential possibility. So these are called the 6 bardos. When we reflect upon this and this process, it seems much less important to obsess about where we happen to be in that cycle or in that process at any moment. To be so obsessed with really trying to be safe and protected and sheltered, secured, insured, right here, right now, as if we can protect ourselves from our nature, as if we can protect ourselves from the inevitability of the next moment and the one after that, as if we can protect ourselves from the uncertainty of where our own karmic projections will lead us next. As we've all heard, there's 2 things, right? One is called plans and the other is called life as it actually happens. Sometimes if we work really hard, they coincide for a little bit, but not so much and not for so long. So what becomes more important when we look at our own experience unfolding within this framework, what becomes more important is how we can be most successful in terms of the entire process. What we should learn about dealing with the present moment and our present state of mind based on this entire process. Where we want to go in the long run, how we want things to unfold, in which direction do we want to go. So one of the things I chanted in the beginning as my preparation to frame this talk with you tonight was called the 4 Dharmas of Gyampopa. And the 4 Dharmas say, may my mind turn towards the Dharma. May the Dharma follow the path, meaning the path to knowledge, the path to freedom, the path to liberation. May that path eliminate confusion and misunderstanding. And finally, may even confusion itself arise as being of the nature of wisdom. Turning, moving towards, going, even these 4 thoughts are framed in terms of the process. Not, I want to be a certain way. I want to be moving in a certain direction. Right? I want that direction to follow a certain course. I want that course to unfold in a particular way, and from that, a realization to dawn. If we really look at our lives, and we look at therefore our spiritual practice, or sadhana as this kind of path or process or unfolding, it's both extremely helpful and extremely, you could almost say, it's going to sound funny, but it's almost like soothing. Because we don't need to worry and freak out about every little detail and every little moment, as long as we stay on track, we stay on course, and wherever we make a mistake or get a little bit fooled, we learn from that and we keep moving, we keep moving, we keep moving. So I tell the story often of one of my teachers named His Holiness Dodrup Chandra Rinpoche, about whom I could talk for a long time, but in short, he used to come to the US to teach about once a year from Tibet and from Sikkim. Now he comes about once every 2 years if he can. He's in his mid-80s, still very strong. But he didn't teach very much. He's been teaching the same group of people from the beginning, going back more than 40 years, so he's very loyal to them, they're very loyal to him. And he's not that interested in teaching kind of like weekenders or dilettantes or people who won't really make the commitment to follow things all the way through. This is his style. But one time, at least some people knew that he would be giving a talk or a blessing a particular day, so I drove to Massachusetts from New York, and he did kind of a little public ceremony to bless people. And then everyone got up to leave, and he said, "No, I'm actually going to teach today." And everyone got very nervous. Like, this is very unusual, and especially the very senior Lama who found out he would have to translate for him got extremely nervous. Even though he's a very, very great Lama, he was very nervous to do a good job. And he talked for about 45 minutes, and basically he said one thing over and over again in different ways. He said, it doesn't matter who you think you are, or what you think about your own life, what kind of status you have. Like me, I'm supposed to be some big shot Rinpoche, High Lama who's the head of this whole lineage, and everyone bows to me, and I'm supposed to be so great. He said, from my own point of view, I'm just a guy who's been trying very hard to practice correctly my whole life. And the only thing I can say with 100% confidence, for sure, from my own experience, that I know will be useful for you as well, is that you just need to keep going. Keep going means keep going on the path. Keep turning your mind towards the truth, towards the Dharma. Keep the Dharma moving more and more towards perfect integration with the path to liberation, to realization. Keep up the process of eliminating confusion, distortion, delusion, turbulence, and so on from your experience through all the different types of practice that you do. And if you do those three things, there's only one result at the end of this process. Whether it's tomorrow, next week, next year in the Bardo, or next life. And that is, you will attain realization. There's no choice. Even if you beg in front of 1,000 Buddhas not to become realized at that point, it will be impossible for them to grant your wish. Because you will have accomplished all the necessary causes and conditions. You will have done all the work. You will have planted the tree and watered it and sheltered it and so on and so on. It will have to produce fruit, which is the culmination of your own spiritual journey. So you're not really here right now, despite what you think, but you are on the way. It's always just unfolding, so just keep going. And don't be so sure what's coming next, and use that uncertainty to your advantage, to your benefit. Rather than as a source of fear or panic, of wanting to hide or protect yourself, use it with a sense of openness, curiosity, and wonder, realizing you really haven't figured it all out yet. But that means there's lots of interesting things, powerful, beautiful things still to learn, to discover, to unfold in your spiritual journey. It's not just sitting here doing the same chants and the same meditation practice every night. It's not the same. Understand? Okay, in that case, shall I take a few minutes of questions, or should we go right to the arati and closing? Whatever you like.
2 minutes of questions.
2 minutes of questions. So speak really fast, or very precisely.
It's slightly off the point, but I'm wondering, where's the Buddhist stand on things like assisted suicide, which seems to be getting more and more traction in the West?
I can't answer that question in less than 2 minutes. Except to say that taking a stand is not what's important. Practicing, conducting oneself in keeping with the Dharma, which means in keeping with what is true and what is helpful, is always important. So until you are in a situation and have the wisdom, clarity, experience, and skill to know what is best to do in that moment, creating a rule ahead of time is not always the perfect thing to do. I will say that much. Yeah. All right, let me just say a closing dedication and then we can have the closing chant. Gewadi nyurduda Dewa Chenpo Drupjurne Drowa Chichan Maluka De Sala Gubarsho Gewadi Chewa Kun Sonam Yeshe Tsokzulne Sonam Yeshe Le Jongwa Damba Kunye Toparsho Drogum Gewa Jinye Yabadam Chetan Chejur Deshin Japadam Zambo Jishin Dere Sara Kune Kunjan Zambo Rejur Che Changjub Semcho Grimbo Che Mache Panam Chejur Che Pa Nyamba Mepa Yang Konde Kondu Pelwar Shok. May the mind of awakening arise where it has not yet arisen, and where it has arisen, may it not weaken but continue to increase and expand further and further. Thank you.